with the introduction of the Reality plugin, the world of unbiased, physically based rendering has been open to every DAZ Studio artist. And that is because Reality works as a bridge between DAZ Studio and Lux Render. Now, Lux is an amazing rendering engine, but it does work in a way that is different from most other renderers. So if you are used to seeing your image appearing line by line or tile by tile, well, Lux will be a surprise, and it's important to know how it works so that you can get the most out of it. So in this tutorial, I'm going to cover some of the inner workings of Lux and how to approach it. Plus, we're going to see some interesting techniques on how to handle the glossy material, which is kind of tricky. For this, I'm going to take inspiration from DimensionTheory's amazing renderer of the Grand Staircase. DimensionTheory is a member of the Carrara forum and came up with a very, very dramatic renderer. So the Grand Staircase is a great environment to try different techniques. So let's load it in Studio. It will take just a minute. Okay, here it is, and let's zoom out a little bit, and we can see that this is a nice set, completely enclosed except for this side. And normally this is not an issue with Studio, but because Lux employs indirect lighting, we will need to address this, but one thing at a time. So let's first position our camera. I'm going to minimize this part here and get ready with the camera. Now the position that I want to have is kind of similar to I saw in the DimensionTheory render, but will be just a little bit different. So here it is. This is pretty much the framing, except that the camera is not wide enough. So we're going to just change the parameters for the camera a bit. And let me select the scene here. Low resolution for this tutorial, so it's a little tough sometimes. And resize this. All right, and go to the parameters, and we're going to change the focal length quite a bit. I always miss it. Here it is. So faint. So the default is 65 millimeters. We're going to go for a very wide angle, almost a fisheye. So 15 millimeters. And it seems like we're being kicked out of the room. But let's zoom in a little more, and now we can finally see our scene, which is pretty good. Okay. And now I'm going to switch to the perspective view, because I need to place the light, and the light will be a sunlight. So we create a distant light. We call it sun. And again, I'm going to switch to the sun as a camera so that I can position it directly like this. So I want the sun to basically shine through this dome and project some light on the stairs. All right, I think that's okay. We have to try. So let's switch back to the default camera, and I just use this option here. Turn off the preview light. All right, let me adjust the frame just a little bit. I think this is good. Okay, so we're gonna call Reality and do a quick test render. Let's see. This is the name of the file. We're gonna use the default. That's fine. Let's just go a little lower on the resolution and render frame. Now, one thing I know about the materials in this scene is that they are way too shiny. And that is a common case because of the different way Studio and Lux handle that type of material. But this is a perfect opportunity to see how the material can be easily adjusted in reality to make it work. So now here we see how reality works. Now, again, it's not an image that is generated line by line from the top down. Initially, people are baffled by this, and they look at the image and say, wow, it's so grainy. The way Lux works is by gathering samples, and you just saw right now that the image changed. So it gathers samples of light for each point of the image. And the process continues and continues and continues without stopping until you stop it. You are the judge of the quality of the image. When it's good enough to satisfy you, then you stop Lux. And I know that it seems a little strange to stop the program while it's still running, but that's the way it works. And Lux will have always your image saved to disk. So this grain here, this is not what people call fireflies. This might be. This big speck here, that looks like one of those. And I see some stuff gathering here. And that's because this material is extremely shiny. It's too shiny. Varnished wood would be shiny, but not this shiny. And everything here is extremely shiny. We can even see the reflections of the windows here. They are windows from this other side, and they are reflecting here. So definitely, this is too glossy. So let's close this and go back to reality and take a look at some of the materials. I'm going to close reality for a second. So I want to see, I had a kind of a speck of white here, and I want to see how this material is defined. So I'm going to go to select the tool, and I'll select the material selection, which is called surface selection. And I can see that this material here is called SC Wood 3. So, okay, let's call reality again. And scroll to SC Wood 3. Now, if I click on the glossiness, this is a glossy material, we can see it. Okay. If I click on the glossiness tab, I see that the value is basically 7,500 out of 10,000. It's not too glossy. I mean, it's not at the maximum, but the glossiness is always calculated as both the specular color and the glossiness strength. If you change this without changing this, you can still have a very, very glossy material. So to save some time, let's just do a test render here, a preview of the material. So it takes a couple of seconds, and here we see that there is a very strong highlight. It's almost square. Now, highlights shouldn't be that sharp. Plus, we can see that the bottom of the sphere here is reflecting the floor quite dramatically. It's almost a mirror-like surface. Now, varnished wood is shiny, but it's not mirror-like. So one thing is I can try to move this down. So it's 7,500. Let's go around here, almost halfway. It should change quite a bit. Let's do a preview again. And it doesn't seem to have changed that much. We almost cut in half the value, but it's still almost the same. Now, if we click on this, on the other hand, we can see that the color for the specular is way high. I mean, when we get halfway in the scale, that's way high. Plus, we really don't need a color on the specular, because That's the way biased renders work with this parameter. It can be a color in lux, but most of the times, you will just go for a shade of gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the white, so it will just turn into a gray slider. And I'm going to bring it, initially we were here. I'm going to bring it here. So half of what it was originally as intensity. So let's click on this and let's do a preview now. So you see that now the lower part is not quite as reflective. This spot is still very sharp, but it's not quite as sharp. Had almost a black line around it. So let's lower this even more. And now it's doing a lot better. Now, one thing that usually changes the way the highlights are painted on the surface is to use a bump map. And unfortunately, this material doesn't have a bump map. What I'm going to show you is absolutely not the correct way of using bump maps. But in a pinch, this can be used. So we can go to the diffuse channel. And in the diffuse, we have our texture. This is what we see. Now, if you want to take a look at the texture in more detail, you click on the View UV. And here it is, the viewer for your UV map. And it might not be very clear now, but if you move the opacity slider, now you can see what happens. So this is the geometry of that particular model that is using this material. And now you can see exactly how those railings are defined. And you can turn off the UV and see that indeed this is a wood texture. So this is good. This is good enough. This is where the material should get the color. Not, the specular should not be like this. The specular should be just neutral. Okay, so if I had this texture in black and white, in shades of gray, I could use this as a bump map. As it turns out, we don't have it in this case. So, I'm going to just cheat. And don't tell anybody. I'm going to be a big cheater. And I go here in the modifiers and the bump map. I just copy it. It's not a bump map, I know. So let's see if anything changes when we do a preview. And we see, in fact, that the reflection has been spread a little bit. So I can even bump up a little bit the value here. There you go. So this is pretty good. It will work. So what I'm going to do here is to right-click, copy this material, and then I click on these other two, which are basically copies of the same for other parts of the geometry, and paste them. Now what I need to do is to do the same trick for the bump map on the other two, because the copy and paste feature doesn't copy the textures. It's on purpose, so it doesn't overwrite things that don't need to be overwritten. But everything else is changed. So here, and we do it for this one here. Okay, so let's see if this is changing anything in our render frame.